The Chicago Blackhawks lose their fourth consecutive game, but Frank Nazar shines on the top line.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, as always, just a reminder to please go and hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well. Mailbag Monday right around the corner. Make sure to reach out with your Blackhawks related questions. I'll bookmark all of them and answer them on Monday's episode. And last but certainly not least, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I am super close to reaching my goal of 2,000 subscribers. I've crossed the 1.95 subscriber threshold, so would really appreciate it. If you haven't hit that button already, please make sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help me out tremendously. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Brutal 3-2 shootout loss for our Blackhawks last night against the Nashville Predators, and just the second meeting of the season, believe it or not, between these two teams, and both of them have unfortunately gone about the same way. In the first matchup, way back on October 25th at the United Center, the Blackhawks held a 2-goal advantage, were up 2-0, looked like they actually extended their lead 3-0. Some of you may remember Connor Bedard unfortunately had a goal overturned for offsides. The Predators get the momentum after that and wind up potting 3 unanswered goals to steal that one 3-2. And kind of the same thing went down for the Blackhawks last night. They held a 2-1 advantage going into the third period, only for Filip Forsberg to tie it up with just over 3 minutes left to play. And then Nashville winds up stealing this one 3-2 in the shootout. Tough way for the Blackhawks to go down on their dad's trip, because they did do a lot of good things in this game, just not enough in the final 20 minutes to hold on to their 1-goal advantage. They've now dropped 4 consecutive games in 12 of their past 17. On the bright side, though, Blackhawks fans, the one real noteworthy takeaway that we have from this game last night is that I think we finally have established a top line, something that really frustrated me, that I've been vocal about here on the podcast, is why the heck it took 30 games for Tyler Bertuzzi to get an opportunity with Connor Bedard on the top line. Those two have been working wonderfully alongside one another for probably the last 3 weeks to a month now, and Bertuzzi was the biggest offseason signing that Kyle Davidson has made as a general manager thus far. I don't know how it took nearly half a season for Bertuzzi to play alongside Connor Bedard, and quite honestly, not only do I think that was a bad look on Luke Richardson, I've talked about how I don't think it's the best look on Kyle Davidson, even though he's the general manager and you want to let your head coach control things and operate the day-to-day adjustments and whatnot. I feel like at some point, Kyle Davidson, as the man who's at the helm of this rebuild, has to go down in that locker room and be like, I don't care what needs to happen, Tyler Bertuzzi has to play with Connor Bedard. And quite honestly, it makes me even more frustrated that it took so long for those two to unite with one another, considering how much they've had success with each other on the top line. But last night, Frank Nazar, for the first time during his current NHL stint, got an opportunity to play on the wing with Connor Bedard and Tyler Bertuzzi on the Blackhawks top line, and that trio absolutely sizzled. With the Blackhawks down 1-0, Tyler Bertuzzi makes a great centering feed to find Connor Bedard all alone in the slot. He sneaks a wrister past UC Saros for his 13th goal of the season, now giving him 14 points over his last 12 games as well. You won't really see it if you just look at the highlights on X and on social media, but that play all started because of a great forecheck by Frank Nazar, and I thought his forechecking ability, not only in this game last night, but throughout his current stint and so far at the NHL level, has been one of his most underrated skill sets, even though he's only 5'9", 5'10", and this is something I talked about when the Blackhawks drafted him. He is an energizer bunny out there. He doesn't let his lack of size keep him away from mixing it up, getting involved in the dirty areas, making an impact on the defensive side of things. We saw it we saw many examples out of Frank Nazar's forecheck last night. all started off that goal from Connor Bedard. And then just moments later, after a Bedard offensive zone face-off win, Alec Martinez takes advantage of a crazy bounce for his second goal in the last 4 games, technically, as the first goal that he scored came back on December 7th. That was the game that he got injured in against the Winnipeg Jets. But another great shift there by the Blackhawks top line. Tyler Bertuzzi picks up his second assist of the game that now gives him 14 points over his last 18 games. 14 of his 24 points on the season have now come over the last 18 games. Hard to believe that Frank Nazar didn't pick up a point in this game with the impact that he made, but he did lead the Blackhawks with 6 shots on goal. Also chipped in with 3 hits as well. Again, doesn't let that lack of size stop him from mixing it up, and also had a +2 rating in just over 17 minutes of time on ice. And one thing I have talked about over probably the last year or so on the podcast, Blackhawks fans, has been my opinion that Frank Nazar could be a good top-line option alongside Connor Bedard in the long term. And I know the Blackhawks view Nazar long-term as a center. That's why they had him playing the center ice position down in Rockford. I think that's why Kyle Davidson didn't make really any center additions in the offseason, right? Because he wanted to keep that 2C spot open potentially for Frank Nazar. Obviously, that didn't go up to plan. He didn't wind up making the team out of camp, but still, that was the mindset behind it because they envisioned Frank Nazar being a center, and that's why he was playing the center ice position so far during this NHL stint. And even though I do think he can play the center ice position, the Blackhawks don't need Frank Nazar to be a center iceman. Considering the depth that they have in their prospect pool, Oliver Moore, Sasha Boisvert, Ryan Green, right, just to name a few, and there's still going to be more and more draft picks coming over the next handful of years. They don't need Frank Nazar to be a center. What they need Frank Nazar to be is a game breaker. It doesn't matter if that's at the wing or at the center ice position. They need Frank Nazar to be a damn good impact player, and I really believe he has the skill set to do that in many different roles. And how nice would it be for the Blackhawks to have a guy like Frank Nazar who maybe if Bedard isn't working well offensively and they need to get that top line going a little bit more, you can bump Frank Nazar up there. You can also share the wealth potentially along one day down the road and have Bedard centering a line, have Frank Nazar centering the second line potentially. But having the option to potentially unite those two on the top line, I think is a great weapon for the Blackhawks to have in their arsenal. And I really do think Frank Nazar's skill set, as I've talked about on the show for a long, long time, really since I had Hadi Kalakash, one half of the Locked On NHL Prospects podcast, come on the show. And he was the one who was super high on Nazar in the 2022 NHL draft. He actually personally would have selected Frank Nazar second overall. And he was really the one who said, I wouldn't be surprised to see Frank Nazar wind up being a wing playing well with Connor Bedard long term. I just think his game fits it. His well-rounded offensive abilities, his tenacity, and his effort on the defensive side of things. He's more impactful in those areas of the game than Connor Bedard is, and I think that would allow Connor Bedard to be his offensive-minded self whenever he and Nazar are out there with one another. Nazar has the speed to play a good top-line game. There are a lot of good tools that I think match up well with Connor Bedard, and I expect to see Bertuzzi, Bedard, and Nazar remain as a line together for the next handful of games. Really good first showing for them together last night in Nashville. I mean, Nazar could have easily had 2 goals. Bertuzzi had a ton of good looks. So did Bedard. The top line was really the driving force for the Blackhawks offense all night long. Really hope Andrew Sorensen, I expect him that he's going to continue to let that top line cook moving forward. One final thing I wanted to bring up from this game as well, really had to bring it up, had to give a shout out to Arvid Soderblom. Even though he let up all 3 goals in the shootout, he was absolutely ecstatic, excellent, I should say, through regulation to get the Blackhawks to that point. He stopped 39 of the 41 shots that he faced in regulation. I mean, 12 of them were like A-plus stops, was tremendous in overtime, faced like 3 or 4 point blankers. Sadly, he went full Robin Lehner mode, and despite standing on his head through regulation, couldn't seemingly make a stop in the shootout, as I think he just got caught a little bit too deep in his net, and I wonder if a lack of experience and a lack of reps and like live shootout situations is kind of the cause for that. But outside of the shootout, Arvid Soderblom was phenomenal last night, and the development this kid continues to show us this year is incredible. And I think it's a good reminder that you never quit on a young goaltender. There were people who were literally ready to cut Arvid Soderblom, would have cut ties with him immediately and given him away for free. You can't do that with a young goaltender because you never can exactly put your finger down on when they are going to show that they're ready to be at this level full time, right? It's a little bit of a roller coaster ride, and there isn't a guarantee for young goaltenders in terms of their development path. And I think it's a good reminder to not panic too much about Drew Comesso's lack of consistency that he's shown down with the Rockford Ice Hogs this year, because he's gone through a lot of similar things that Arvid Soderblom did last year, right? Like going up to the NHL level, going back down to Rockford, never being in one consistent spot. That clearly made an impact on Soderblom's game last year, and I think it naturally has had an impact on Drew Comesso's game during his sophomore professional campaign as well. I really don't have concerns about Drew Comesso. He's kind of buttoned down the hatches a little bit here as of late. Did have his second shutout of the year, I believe, last weekend. But it's just a good reminder, again, you got to be patient with these young goaltenders because Arvid Soderblom has truly looked like one of the best young netminders in the entire NHL so far this year, a statement that I don't think any Blackhawks fan would anticipate they'd be saying this year, considering what they had seen the last two seasons out of number 40 in between the pipes. But there are my thoughts on the Blackhawks. Brutal 3-2 loss to the Nashville Predators, even though we got to see some good stuff out of Frank Nazar, Connor Bedard, and Tyler Bertuzzi on the top line. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll share my thoughts on Wyatt Kaiser being healthy scratched and Isaak Phillips getting traded to the Winnipeg Jets. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can start the postseason strong with $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Yes, not a $5 first bet has to win in order to get these $200 worth of bonus bets No, it is absolutely guaranteed. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to now pick up a W. Personally, I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. But FanDuel also has bets for player props, money lines, game specials, and much, much more. And take advantage of this amazing offer. Be sure to go and visit FanDuel.com right now in order to join today. Again, that's FanDuel.com for your chance to win $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed if you're not already signed up. So what are you waiting for? Go and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Segment 2, definitely wanted to mention the lineup changes that the Blackhawks made last night, as despite arguably having his worst game as a member of the Chicago Blackhawks, as I talked about during Tuesday's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, Seth Jones was not healthy scratched like some people anticipated, like I thought he possibly could be here against the Nashville Predators, right? We had seen TJ Brodie be healthy scratched on Monday against the Calgary Flames, a team that he played a long time for because his play recently just simply hadn't been good enough. So I wasn't, going to be surprised if we saw Seth Jones scratched for the first time as a member of the Blackhawks when they took on the Nashville Predators last night, even though he, of course, was drafted by the Predators and played with them for a couple of years to kickstart his NHL career. Jones did not wind up getting healthy scratch last night. And Wyatt Kaiser was the one, believe it or not, to come out of the lineup with TJ Brodie drawing back in. I'm getting to that point, Blackhawks fans, where I'm about to come on the show and absolutely scream. Because as I broke down in Deep Dive 4.0, Wyatt Kaiser has the best analytics of any Blackhawks defenseman. It has some of the best analytics of any Blackhawks player on the team this season. And I'm not the biggest analytics guy. I have never been in analytics as the end-all, be-all type of guy. I like to use analytics to match with what I've been seeing along with the eye test and kind of come to a bigger conclusion with both of those things. And the eye test has told me that Wyatt Kaiser has done a lot of good things this year, and more importantly, the skills that he possesses, I believe, is how you want an NHL defenseman to play nowadays if you can control what kind of skill sets they have. Wyatt Kaiser can move back there. He's been solid, at least compared to what he was as a rookie. He's been much better in his own end. He's handled his gap control a lot better, the physicality in terms of along the boards and in front of his goaltender as well, right? Like, I think he's made huge strides in all of those areas, and the speed, the hockey IQ that he has to jump up in the play on the rush. He has the wheels to cycle around in the offensive zone. Like, he has all the skills that I think can make for a really sound two-way defenseman one day down the road. And you're going to scratch this kid so you can play Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie and Seth Jones, who just had the worst game of his Blackhawks tenure on Monday night. And I will cut Jones a little bit of, I will cut Sorensen some slack here in terms of electing to go with Seth Jones in the lineup once again as a primary minute eater. I get it. I wouldn't have been surprised, like I said, to see Seth Jones scratched. But I understand Jones being in there over guys like Martinez and Brodie. Alec Martinez blocks a ton of shots, but he can't move back there, man. And yes, he does have 2 goals in his last 4 games. Now, both have kind of been lucky breaks. And yeah, you kind of make your own luck. Getting pucks on net is a good thing, but there is no long-term future here for Alec Martinez. The only reason he's playing is so we can flip him potentially at the trade deadline for like a 3rd round pick, which quite honestly, like the Blackhawks don't even really need that 3rd round pick. You know what they need? They need Wyatt Kaiser. They need their young defenseman getting reps. And to play Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie. Again, a reminder of why we did not need to sign both of these guys in the offseason. To play both of them over Wyatt Kaiser, considering the position the Blackhawks are in right here, right now, and the skills that I just outlined that Wyatt Kaiser possessed, it's absolutely asinine, Blackhawks fans. It is a horrible and unexcusable decision for a team to make in the middle of a rebuild. Why is Wyatt Kaiser the only one who has to live up to some sort of accountability? Doesn't need to happen. I mean, it finally happened to TJ Brodie. He finally got scratched for the first time in like 2 months, despite him having a horrible goals for margin at even strength this year. It's like 33-18. He's been terrible. And I don't care that he's being paid $3.75 million. Kyle Davidson, if you need to choose between what's best for the team or you looking like an asshole, you need to choose what's best for the team. I don't care if TJ Brodie's going to be pissed at you and the coaching staff that you brought him in here on a 2-year deal and now you're going to healthy scratch him. Guess what, TJ Brodie? You wouldn't be getting healthy scratched if you weren't playing awful hockey defensively. There is no world Wyatt Kaiser should be getting scratched right here, right now with the Blackhawks at the bottom of the standings. These are the exact moments you let young defensemen like that learn. And the way the Blackhawks are handling Wyatt Kaiser, you think he'd been atrocious for this team this year. And again, in my opinion, he has the higher upside between Nolan Allen. And I've been thrilled with what I've seen from Nolan Allen this year. He was someone that, if you've been a long-term viewer or listener of the show, then you know I didn't really have high-end NHL expectations for him. And I've been pleasantly surprised to see Nolan Allen kind of prove me wrong there. But if you're asking me right here, right now, and again, maybe I'm wrong on this, Blackhawks fans, let me know in the comment section if you think I'm crazy. But if you're asking me right here, right now, which defenseman I'd rather have, considering what the Blackhawks already have at their blue line, if you're asking me, would I take Nolan Allen or Wyatt Kaiser? I'm taking Wyatt Kaiser. He's got the wheels. He's got the offensive upside. Maybe he's not as physical as Nolan Allen or as physically mature, but he still handles his own well in the defensive zone. He can still play on the penalty kill. He's still shelling out hits, and he undoubtedly is the speedier defenseman that just gives you much higher upside. So I just don't understand what's happening right now. I'll give Sorensen the benefit of the doubt with the Seth Jones situation, but for TJ Brodie to get back in the lineup last night over Wyatt Kaiser, get out of here, Andrew Sorensen. Absolutely ridiculous, man. A terrible decision for this rebuild. And again, it's another moment where general manager Kyle Davidson, I'm sure, he probably doesn't want to get involved in the hands-on and be telling the coach what to do. You got to go in that room and be like, why are we playing TJ Brodie, man? You got to live up to your mistake. You messed up by giving TJ Brodie this contract, but you can still fix it because we got to focus on the young players. You got to take control of the situation. I was upset, didn't take control over the Tyler Bertuzzi thing, right or wrong. I was upset that it took 30 games for Tyler Bertuzzi to get an opportunity with Connor Bedard. There is no reason that Wyatt Kaiser should be getting scratched on a regular basis. Really, really has rubbed me the wrong way the last few weeks, Blackhawks fans. Someone's got to step in and do something about it because it makes literally no sense to be having Martinez and TJ Brodie in the lineup over Wyatt Kaiser. One thing I also want to get to here, Blackhawks fans, during segment 2, something that I haven't been able to talk about on the show, as the first Locked On NHL Squad show was dropped on Wednesday morning, and then yesterday's episode of Locked On Blackhawks was a special crossover with Emma from Locked On Predators. That's why my midseason prospect rankings have been pushed back a little bit. I promise, Blackhawks fans, I am recording an episode on Saturday this week so I can get out part 1 of my midseason prospect rankings. But another thing that I haven't been able to get to here as of late, which is kind of the working of the schedule, was Isaak Phillips being dealt to the Winnipeg Jets as a change of scenery move earlier on in the week. Phillips was a 5th-round pick for the Blackhawks back in 2020, who had kind of an interesting path to the NHL, right? After being a 5th-round selection, he quickly made the jump to the pro scene because of COVID. There was no OHL campaign that year, so Phillips ultimately ended up joining the Rockford Ice Hogs and kind of got his pro career kickstarted earlier than anyone anticipated, and I really do believe that worked well in his development, because did he make his NHL debut? I think he made his NHL debut in the fall of 2022, like way sooner than anyone anticipated. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a tough path for Phillips to consistently remain at the NHL level. He's played in 56 NHL games over the last couple of years, tallying 12 points, 2 goals, and 10 assists, but he had clearly just fallen behind in the pecking order with kind of the assertion of numerous defensemen over these last couple of years. He was playing most of this year down with the Rockford Ice Hogs in the AHL once again, and something I have been very vocal about on this podcast was my disliking of the handling of Isaak Phillips. I thought this was a really good opportunity to use him as the 7th defenseman, but Louis Crevier's made huge strides, Nolan Allen, Wyatt Kaiser, right? We've seen Kevin Korchinski at the NHL level too. There just wasn't a whole lot of room for Isaak Phillips, who truthfully just never had the highest NHL upside. I do believe he can be an NHL caliber defenseman on the 3rd pairing or as a 7th D-man, but it's as a stay-at-home defensive defenseman. And again, with the Blackhawks being where they're at in the rebuild, they're kind of focused on guys with the higher ceiling. So ultimately, wound up being time for a change of scenery trade for Isaak Phillips. I really do wish the Blackhawks would have given him a bigger opportunity, but I did kind of see this coming. There was never going to be a spot for him on the back end here in Chicago. So the Hawks wind up trading him to the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for 2021 3rd-round pick Dmitry Kuzmin. 5'10", 195-pound left-handed defenseman. He's yet to make his NHL debut. Been spending the last couple of seasons playing at the AHL level, tallying just 7 points, 2 goals, and 5 assists in 39 career AHL games. So for both sides, this seems like strictly a change of scenery type of move. However, one thing I do want to point out is that Kuzmin is a native of Belarus, like Blackhawks 2024 second overall pick Artem Levshinov. And according to reports, the two actually trained together this past offseason down in Florida and are both represented by the same agent, Dan Milstein. So they're familiar with one another. Could be a good comfort add for Artem Levshinov down at the AHL level. Gives him a good buddy to have good vibes around. But other than that, I don't really see Dmitry Kuzmin as being anything here for the Blackhawks. I don't see him having NHL upside one day down the road. Blackhawks are at least somewhat familiar with him, though, as he played from 2021 to 2023 with the Flint Firebirds in the Ontario Hockey League alongside Blackhawks prospect Gavin Hayes. So the Hawks, I'm sure, are somewhat familiar with Kuzmin. Don't really think they have high expectations for him, though. I really think he could just be a potential D partner maybe for Levshinov down in Rockford, a good Belarusian native to kind of have around and keep his spirits high. But other than that, there's no real upside here for Dmitry Kuzmin. Isaak Phillips, in my opinion, is definitely the better of the two players in this deal. But again, it was just time for a change of scenery for him and a fresh start elsewhere to give him a new opportunity to kind of make his name. That wasn't going to happen here in Chicago, but I'm definitely wishing Isaak Phillips all the best. He was someone, like I mentioned a moment ago, someone I was pretty high on these last couple of years. Really wish he would have gotten more of an opportunity with the Blackhawks, because I thought for the most part, whenever he came onto the NHL scene as a guy who didn't really have many expectations as a 5th-round selection, I thought he handled his own pretty well and showed good signs of development these last couple of years. So again, wishing Isaak Phillips all the best in his fresh start with the Winnipeg Jets. We'll see if Dmitry Kuzmin winds up being anything for the Rockford IceHogs or the Chicago Blackhawks. I highly doubt that's the case, but there are my thoughts on the Isaak Phillips trade from earlier on in the week. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I close things out, I still have to get into my thoughts on the Blackhawks Quarter Century Team. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 3, one thing I also have yet to discuss here on the show with everything that's been going down the last few weeks was the Blackhawks Quarter Century Team. I don't know if anyone just saw that spit, but I really, really apologize if you did. That was pretty brutal. The Blackhawks Quarter Century Team that dropped on December 31st, New Year's Eve, ahead of the Blackhawks matchup with the St. Louis Blues at Wrigley Field for the Winter Classic. And for those of you who don't know, the NHL has been progressingly, I was going to say that didn't seem right, have been dropping quarter century teams for every NHL club day after day. The Blackhawks were really early on, though. They are the ones that kickstarted it, actually, ahead of this Winter Classic. But yeah, I haven't been able to kind of share my thoughts on the Blackhawks Quarter Century Team since it's been announced. First team for the Blackhawks as far as their forwards, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, no surprise there. Patrick Sharp, though, as a member of the first team as far as the Blackhawks Quarter Century squad, definitely was the biggest surprise here. Defenseman Brent Seabrook, Duncan Keith, and in goal Corey Crawford. I think all of that's pretty set in stone, right? For Patrick Kane, he's got the most points of any Blackhawks player since the turn of the century, 1,255, 446 goals, and 779 assists in 1,161 games. Conn Smythe Trophy winner, Hart Trophy winner, 3-time Stanley Cup champion. We knew Patty Kane was going to be here. We knew Jonathan Toews was going to be here as well. The second most point of any Blackhawk since the turning of the century, 883 points, 372 goals, 511 assists for Captain Sirius in 1,067 games with the Hawks. Also, a Conn Smythe Trophy winner, won the Selke Trophy, 3-time Stanley Cup champion, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, has basically won everything there is to win in the game of hockey. No surprise to see Jonathan Toews here. But as I said, Patrick Sharp is probably the shocker of this list. I think the reason that he wound up making it is because he has the third most points of any Blackhawk since the year 2000, 532 points, 249 goals, 283 assists, and 749 games between the two stints. Also is a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, was one of the first Blackhawks on the scene as part of that rebuilding squad, right? Was acquired from the Philadelphia Flyers early on. I believe that was back in 2005. I feel like those are the reasons that Patrick Sharp ultimately wound up on the first team. To me, I still think it absolutely has to be Marian Hossa. Defensively, Keith and Seabrook, there's no surprise there. Keith, 625 points in 1,192 games for the Blackhawks, 105 goals, 520 assists, 2-time Norris Trophy winner, 3-time Stanley Cup champion, Conn Smythe winner in 2015 for putting the team on his absolute back and playing like 32, 33 minutes a game in the postseason. Guy was as special as they come on the defensive side of things. And then you had the vocal leader, Brent Seabrook, 464 career points, 103 goals, 361 assists, and 1,114 career games. 2 and 7, those are numbers that are going to be remembered by Chicago Blackhawks fans for a long, long time. And then we got number 50, Corey Crawford in net, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. How about these numbers for Crawford in his career with the Blackhawks? 260 wins, 162 losses, 53 shootout losses, 2.45 goals against average, .918 save percentage, and 26 shutouts in 488 career games with the Blackhawks. .918 save percentage for his career with Chicago. Man, was Corey Crawford a special goaltender. I'll die on the hill that, hey, I love Patty Kane as much as the next guy. You can all tell by the backdrop. Corey Crawford should have won the Conn Smythe in 2013. Goals against was like 2.05, something absolutely ridiculous. Save percentage was .920 throughout the postseason. I was a little shell-shocked when Corey Crawford didn't come home with that 2013 Conn Smythe. Now getting to the Blackhawks' second team for their quarter-century squad, the forwards, Alex DeBrincat, Marian Hossa, and Brandon Saad. Hossa obviously was going to be part of the second team. I personally would have had him as part of the first team. Alex DeBrincat, handful of good seasons with the Blackhawks before being dealt to the Ottawa Senators, was a two-time 40-goal scorer here as a member of the Blackhawks. As we know, 40-goal scorers do not grow on trees. Brandon Saad, two-time Stanley Cup champion with the Blackhawks as well. Yeah, I could see Brandon Saad going here. You could probably argue Artemi Panarin, even though he didn't have the postseason success. He was absolutely electric with Patrick Kane. Won the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year that season, of course. I get why Brandon Saad was here, though, as when he was a young player, the postseason success that he had at a young age and his speed and two-way play along with Jonathan Taves and Marian Hossa on that top line, I mean, they were like unbeatable. And it's been disappointing that Brandon Saad really hasn't lived up to that level of player these last handful of years, ever since truthfully being traded from Chicago. I don't really have a problem with DeBrincat, Hossa, and Saad being the three forwards. I would have had DeBrincat, Saad, and Patrick Sharp. Defensively, Nicholas Hjalmarsson absolutely was going to find himself as part of the second team. Brian Campbell was the one who makes it with the second team as well, alongside Hjalmarsson. I disagree here, Blackhawks fans. I was never a Brian Campbell guy. Never, ever, ever. I always thought he was overpaid. I never thought he was good enough in his own zone. And hey, Soupy, if you happen to be hearing this, man, I'm sorry. I'm just telling you the truth. I think you've done an awesome job as a front office member and Kyle Davidson's right-hand man here with the Blackhawks. I'd give it to Johnny Oduya, though, Blackhawks fans, because I don't have the record in front of me, but I know after the Blackhawks added Johnny Oduya, there was like a year-and-a-half stretch where they had like 7 regulation losses. Johnny Oduya was epic. And some of you may remember in 2015, Johnny Oduya was not good in the regular season. He really, really struggled, but he sacked up and played his best hockey in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And the Blackhawks basically won that Stanley Cup with 4 defensemen, right? Like Trevor Van Riemsdyk, Kimmo Timonen, Kyle Comiskey. Like they were playing bums on that third pairing. Me personally, I would have given Johnny Oduya the nod over Brian Campbell. I thought he made more of an impact to those 2 Stanley Cup teams than Brian Campbell did, certainly. In goal, Jocelyn Thibault is the one who winds up getting the start here for the second team. I can't really speak on this because I was too young to remember the Jocelyn Thibault era, and I can just kind of look at the numbers. They look really good. I still think you just have to go with Antti Niemi because he brought this team their first Stanley Cup in 49 years, and no one anticipated him to be the goaltender to do so. I know it was a short tenure here for Antti Niemi, but that 2010 postseason run was incredible. Thinking about the saves that he made in that San Jose Sharks series, like, Nemo was crazy that year. I'm not going to argue Jocelyn Thibault, but that's personally where I would have gone. Number 31, Antti Niemi. But make sure to let me know your thoughts on the Blackhawks Quarter Century Team down in the comment section below right now, whether you would have Marian Hossa on the first team like I did. Would you have Antti Niemi as the second team goaltender? Would you have Johnny Oduya in there over Brian Campbell? Make sure to let me know your thoughts on the Blackhawks Quarter Century Team down below in the comment section. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2, but be sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way, you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, and yes, there will be an episode dropping tomorrow, part 1 of my Chicago Blackhawks midseason prospect rankings. Keep an eye out for that. Until then, everyone, have a great rest of your Friday. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.